Good morning, everyone. As you're going to see today, experts come in all sorts of forms and backgrounds, and we are really privileged to have two exceptional experts joining us this morning. Please join me in welcoming Randall Simmons and Jess Thornton. Guys, and where are our portable mics? Right behind you. We got to get our Oprah stage set. 1 second. All right.
All right.
Have either of you ever done a talk like this?
Go ahead.
I did one in
Hold your mic up a little bit.
it was in Snohomish County. I did like a spaghetti feed speak.
Yeah.
But nothing like where I'm sitting in front of professionals on camera. So.
Randall?
I'd have to say this is the most professional group I've been in front of a couple just to share my story and stuff.
Well, check in with them at like 5 o'clock and you'll see how, how they might be a little different. I think it's safe to say you're among friends.
Indeed.
And people whose minds and hearts are really open to what you have to share today. So we're going to chat with you a little bit, Randall, and then we'll chat with you a little, Jess, and then anybody will save time at the end here for you to ask your questions as well. Is everyone hearing okay? All right. So what we don't want to talk about today is the drama of life back then. I'm sure there's plenty of drama that we could talk about, but we really wanted to focus more on understanding your paths and what were those people or services or points along the way that helped you get where you are today. So, but in order to understand that, we do have to have a little bit of sense of your relationship with this drug. So you want to share a little bit about where you met meth and how your relationship progressed?
Yeah, I grew up in New Mexico, and when I was about 16 years old, I started snorting crank, which is meth. And then at 19, I was introduced to intravenous drug use with methamphetamine. And that was it. That was what I decided to do. I've had some successes in life, but I've always destroyed them through that. Methamphetamine use, which leads to incarceration, which leads to, well, I'm going to do good. I've got a good heart. I know that I can do this life thing and get out. And it's just, the thing with me was to fall back into the same cycles of life that I was doing. And I've lost two great families, through this whole thing. But do you want to go ahead and talk about the end of it?
Well, tell us a little bit more about how, what did you like about it? How did it help you?
At the beginning, it just a sense of euphoria. You can get a lot done. It makes you smarter than everybody else. I had life figured out. And there's also other benefits as far as you just feel like you're, especially at the beginning, right? You just feel like you can do anything. And all the pain or the troubles that you had in your life, you just forget about them. And it seems, it seems like at that time anyway, a better way to go, It was better than me drinking all the time or any of the other stuff. And then when I found intravenous drug use, it was like, well, I've really got it figured out. But in that same token, so it doesn't take too long, especially the more you use it, for the bottom to drop out. And my bottom was always losing. I've been a plumber all my life, but losing my company or losing my job, then losing my family, and then losing my freedom. I'd be locked up over and
Talk about
over.
that a little bit?
Well,
because that's an important part of your story.
Yeah, and we started doing strong arm robberies in 1987, and it just seemed like a good idea. An easy way to get money, but of course that came to an end. It always does, and I was able to not do a whole lot of time there in New Mexico, and so I got out and things were good for a while. Moved up to Washington because my folks lived up here with my family. And it wasn't too long before I found where the meth was. And, it seemingly by accident. I had a company, I had a business, I had employees. And you think that you can do it differently. You think that you can, it'll be different this time. And it's fun, right? There's some other things that go along with it that are fun. Your life is exciting, it's fun. But then, even the crime element of it, because inevitably in my life anyway, I would go right back to criminal activity because it's hard to keep a job, it's hard to keep the drive going, to keep a company running, and it's easy just to do meth and the crime that goes along with it. And once again, lost my family, went to prison. And got out and stayed good for, a few years. But even during that time, I was struggling with addiction, other forms of addiction, alcohol mainly. And then in 2008, 7 or 8, I decided, me and my wife at the time went all in again. Somebody up the street, a friend of ours, said, "Oh, wow, she does meth. Well, that's cool. Does she have any rigs?" Yes. So there it was again. And so for the next several years after that, it was crime and losing my kids and then losing the people that cared about me. But your whole life is built around those folks. Your community is those people. So I'd get arrested, get released out of jail, and those are the people that I would connect to. Those are the people that I would want to go to. Those are the people that I loved and loved me. I was a part of that community. But it's a vicious community. They don't really love, it's hard to know. I mean, they just care, you know what I mean? It's not phony. It's just what you can give it. But it's a selfish thing, the addiction of any type. And I can speak specifically to this meth. It becomes very selfish. So my final arrest was in 2012, the end of 2012. And I was tired. I was 48 years old and spent 29 years off and on in crime and methamphetamine addiction. And, my mom's prayers and God's grace opened a door for me through Skagit Valley Drug Court, Skagit County Drug Court. And it was an opportunity for me to be mandated to stay away from everything that I knew and to go through the pain without using, go through the pain of missing my family, missing everybody that I cared about, everything that made me important. And it was a humbling experience, but I grabbed hold of it. And I said, this is an opportunity for me to do everything differently. So the community, even though it was mandated, it was a hammer. I was facing, I think, 12 years at that time. You do this 2-year program or you're going to go do 12 years. And I just took, I don't know if I was just ready, and the Lord just opened up the doors for me to really take everything that they had to offer. And amazing things happened. I went to school for a little bit. I was able to be a drug court counselor right after I got out of drug court. And so I worked for Pioneer Human Services, which opened the door for me to be one of the leads on the mobile needle exchange, which is a really interesting thing. And I won't take too much time, but I get to do that work with the same people that I used to do crime with, the same faces and same people that I used to run with. And they say, well, what happened, And I'm able to tell them. And so through that, I now am a director of New Earth Recovery, which is, we have transition homes, recovery houses for people coming out of prison and in addiction and in treatment. We put them through a program. So everything in my life, I work a lot, but everything in my life has revolved around helping people. My relationship with my kids and even my ex-wives are strong and good. And you look back, and I just, the opportunity for me to be something that I might have thought I could be, but I was just given a chance to understand that I was a good guy and I could have potential.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Randy. Jess, do you want to share a little bit about your path?
Sure. So I've been a Washington resident since I can remember. I grew up in a home that was reflective of addiction. And then throughout my adolescence, I had these little exposures to partying. And then after I had my daughter was when I was exposed to meth. And it was as simple as I was taking out the trash at work, and it was in a cigarette pack. And at that time, I was already on opiates. And in my story, it's not just one or the other. They came together. And meth allowed me to move about the cabin, so to speak, because I'm dual diagnosed. So I would get too far down and I couldn't function, so it came hand in hand. So I did a hard relapse. I found recovery back in 2012, 2013. And I went off both of them, and then not too shortly long after that, I went back on both of them. And my story has homelessness. I separated from my daughter. I made the choice. I didn't have any services that came into line and told me that I had to go. I knew that at some point that I had become a dangerous individual, and I knew I wasn't acceptable. And so I removed myself at that point, and I was on the streets for a couple of years. And then it just got to the point where I was, through the loss of a relationship and through the insanity of that, and I went to jail for like 10 days. Before that, I went to Phoenix and Burlington Crisis Center to detox, and they took me to inpatient, and then out of inpatient, 10 days out, I had relapsed and was back on the streets. And so I have these different services that helped me. It wasn't just one or the other. I had jail, I had inpatient, detox centers. After I got out of jail, I was out for about 3 months, and then the source that what got me back was like the human source of family. My family took me back in, and when I finally became honest, they gave me the room and freedom to cycle out and survive through. And so at that point, I went to Seattle Counseling Services here in Seattle, and I was doing one-on-ones through chemical dependency, art therapy, and a discovery group. And I furthered along with that. So those are the services that really helped me. And I'm also involved. I'm not in the behavioral drug addiction professionals like you are. I work at a pizza shop in Federal Way. And proudly, but what keeps me connected and what the good right, there's good and bad consequences, because my addiction kept me so long of being dishonest because I thought I was bad, right? The stigmas that come with addiction, right? So if I'm bad and I'm unacceptable, that means I have to live up to this label. Well, the good and bad consequences that my drug use, meth use taught me was the fact that I have actually something to give to people. And that's my time. And I volunteer at the AIDS outreach in Snohomish County. And the syringe exchange, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm just part of that program, and it allows me to be there for people that I get to meet them on their level like they met me. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that. So what I hear that's common to your stories is that it was never one thing that did it, and sometimes it was the same thing several times, that it perhaps helped you for a period of time in your life. But regardless of the program or the service or the consequence, what really helped you root in changing was a sense of connection, was the people in your life. Would you say that's true?
I think that's very true. You know, I come to believe that connection is the treatment for addiction, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Jess, how about you?
Connection and time. It's not see, I heard one of the key phrases that gets me is a fix. We have to fix people. And I think that's one of the things about addiction is either close to the source, me, myself, and I, or the you, whoever's stuck in the cycle of it, we forget that it's not an overnight thing. That there is no fix for it, that we're here to help people. And because fix means broken, and we're not broken. We're just wounded at the time. And so, and with a wound, there's care that comes with it, and compassion, and time to heal. So,
Yeah.
I would say that, like to your point, we're not broken, and the thing is that a lot of people choose to be in that lifestyle, and just so for us to be able to help them, they have to want to be helped, and I think that's where sometimes the disconnect is as far as what do we do to help. You see somebody that's in the throes of addiction, well, they must want the help. They must need the help. And it's in and down deep, definitely, because they're struggling. But the step to say, okay, I want to go through whatever it takes to get there, to be not addicted to this particular drug, is a tough spot, right? And I guess that's why we're all here, to figure out what to do.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of things that I think are common, maybe misunderstandings about people in addiction. And one is what you said, that there's something broken that needs to be fixed. And that we create all these fabulous programs and services, they must want them. And you're saying maybe at some
Maybe
level,
if
but...
you need them, yeah, but then, you got to come out of the shadows or come out of your crime and engage. And for me, anyway, it took the hammer. And it took, I was 48 years old before I stopped. And I look back, and there's probably opportunities, and there was definitely opportunities, and I just was too smart. I thought I could do it, and
Yeah.
even after all the terrible things.
Do you think there are some other common sort of misunderstandings about either methamphetamine or people who use methamphetamine or that you faced in your own journeys, or that you see people facing now that aren't helpful? And I'm talking specifically about what the helping profession might bring, their preconceived ideas about meth or meth addiction that maybe aren't so helpful or not correct. Is there anything that you encountered or a stigma that people bring to it? Either people who are using or people who are helping? Okay.
I'll say that the stigma around it and what as professionals see, what they would typically think is a meth addict. They come in all sizes and shapes. We used to sell to lawyers and doctors and people in the professions that are holding on, still going with it. And they're not, you see somebody in a tent and a tweaker or whatever, that's one facet of it. But there are so many, all walks of life. And so you don't know where their struggle is or who it is. It could be the guy in the suit coming in the door.
You want to say more about that, Jess? Or?
Yeah, well, I have, because like I said, addiction's been in my family, and so, I have family members that have also been down this road, and she had a home, and, was owning a home, so it's not just the tweaker aspect, right? That's a really abusive way to look at each other. It's, so for somebody that may need help, who wants help, because there's some people out there that don't want help. Just because we walk by them on the street and we have a problem with it doesn't mean that they're going to have a problem with it. And that's the barrier, and that's a really hard thing to accept. And but it doesn't discriminate. Like it just the drug doesn't. So
Yeah. One thing that I think many of us are finding different this time around from 20 years ago is the prevalence of people who are using both methamphetamine and heroin, as in back in the day. Most people chose one or the other, and the two groups didn't often intersect. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you handled both your opioid addiction and your methamphetamine addiction?
Well, it was about survival, because, I mean, in my story, it came really down to the survival mechanism where I was living out of a tent. My form of support was through manipulation and through pretty much my own disrespect. And so it came down to survival. I had this illusion that if I did one too much of the other one, then the other one was going to keep me awake. Well, through research now, like, that just destroys your body quicker. One doesn't help the other. And so, because I had to tell myself, even though I was on a survival mechanism and I had to zombie out, that I had to be functioning somehow. And so, or I had to get alive somehow. And when I didn't have opiates, the meth was there to somehow, and that's pretty much on my journey to getting clean and detoxifying. It was a way to help with the symptoms. So I didn't no longer had the opiates, so it was like, all right, so I'm gonna get jacked up on meth, and hopefully, but that made me more insane at that point. So it was just like picking one poison over the other, so that way I didn't feel like I was tearing out of my own skin.
Yeah. You feel ready to take a few questions from the audience? Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Yes, Shelley, go ahead.
I'll grab a mic. Thank you. So when you were in it, did you think you were addicted, or did you spend time in that life not thinking that you had an addiction problem?
I don't know that I ever want to say, I could face the fact that I was addicted. I thought I could quit, but you know what? You can wake up every day and you can't think. To think that you're going to go through the whole day without doing a blast or something like that, it's unthinkable. But I don't think until for me anyway, actually quit. There was a moment that I saw myself that way through the recovery, and I was like, wow, you know. But during it, I didn't really, I've got it all figured out.
At the point when I started using it, I already had accepted that I was there. Like, there was no denial of it. I had denial before I found opiates and meth. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not that, because I didn't want to be the model of what I saw when I was actually turning into that. So by the time that the chemicals had gotten into me, I was like, all right, this is what I am. And with that guilt and shame, and not knowing how to navigate through that or have the coping skills, like, it just drove me deeper. And I was like, okay, now this is really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So,
A lot of shame. Yeah.
I have
Is
a
there
question
another?
right here.
Okay.
Hey, thank you both for sharing your story. I have a question about Ricky's Law. And so Ricky's Law is about involuntary treatment for people with substance use disorders. And I'm wondering about your opinion about, is that a viable option for certain people, or where do you stand on that continuum? Because I hear everything from absolutely not, and comments from that to we should involuntarily commit everybody. And obviously, involuntarily committing everybody is not the answer. In my opinion, maybe not doing something on the other end. So I'm just curious about your perspectives on that. I know that there's beds, for example, in this state right now that are empty, and are there opportunities to intervene with people through involuntary treatment from your perspectives?
well, what comes to mind is, yes, that saves a life. And recovery and trying to heal is first it's got to be the me, myself, and I. It's the use, right? That we know the bigger problem because we have hindsight. It's the you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I believe the assessment of involuntary is what's the tipping of the scale? Is it going to be useful or not? Is there another body out there that's going to want it more than anybody else? And that's the hard thing to accept is if somebody doesn't have the desire, then the chances are lower. And so, I mean, you're putting somebody through an experience they don't want. And just because we want it for somebody doesn't mean they want it. And that's the thing as professionals we get to accept. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
In my opinion, and that was well said, absolutely. Interestingly enough, I get to work in this recovery field and with recovery houses. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had a fellow that he struggles mightily. He's had huge surgeries on his heart. And I'll tell you, when he went back out, I mean, he could die anytime. And so we tried, the people that were looking over him tried to do that with the Ricky's Law. And whether it's a good idea or not, I mean, I think that the idea is good, right? And there's some value in it. But the implementation of it, at least in Skagit County, very, very difficult. It almost couldn't be done because nobody's familiar enough with it to do it correctly. And like Jessica said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so it's hard for me to reconcile that, like, we're going to make you do this, you know, because you're going to do it because it's for your own good. But then on the other hand, if it saves their life and some years down, they can look back and say, that was the moment that saved my life. That was the moment. I had to get it beat over my head, but that helps me. So I think it could be good.
Thanks for the easy question, Jim. All right, we have time for one more question.
Hi, my question is, because I work for probation, and we have assessments, we have things that we ask you guys. What is it that you see that we miss, and how can we make it better for people that are addicted?
Another easy question. Thanks.
Right. These are good. Well, when you work in probation and the assessments, my experience, to speak for my own, when I go before a probation officer for an assessment or anything like that, while I'm still in addiction and want to be a criminal, you're not going to know really what is going on with my life. I can't get away from the thought of until the person wants to change, they can't change. So I don't know how we can pull that out of them better, especially in that situation. It has to be the right time in their life, I guess, I don't know. Yeah.
I can't speak on this one, so.
Yeah. I think what you're both helping me realize is how uncomfortable it is on the outside waiting. Mm-hmm. And we're not good at that. I'm not good at it, And perhaps this idea that it's either this service or it's nothing. Yeah. And maybe we can do a better job of thinking about ways to support people when the services we have or the probation or whatever the intervention is that's being offered isn't needed at that time. What else could we be doing? It can't just be these either or.
It has to be together. I think that's the idea.
Yeah. I think that we could probably listen to you guys for a long time, and I think there's probably 100 more questions out there for you, but at this point, we are going to just say thank you.
Thank you.
For sharing your stories.
Thanks.